Hi, GVF. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are in the middle of a sermon series entitled On Hold, where this idea that there's times in life that God takes us to a place where life's just stuck. We can't go back to where we were, but we don't know yet where we're going, and we don't know what is ahead. We are on hold. And today in this sermon, we're going to be talking about how God uses these times in life to completely transform us, and that He uses the worst of things, which is our brokenness, our rebellion against Him, and our blatant sin, to completely transform us. The idea is, too, that when we encounter God's grace, His true grace, we will never be the same. We will look at the world different. We will look at other people different. We will look at ourselves different. And really, we will look at God different. We cannot encounter God's grace and be the same. So take a breath, take a moment, and when you're ready, listen to the message.
The sons of Korah. You might not know the sons of Korah by name, but you probably know their work. So Psalm 42 through Psalm 49, Psalm 84 and 85. Psalm 42 starts out, "As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul longs for you." Like as that deer out in the wilderness is dying of thirst, so my soul longs for God. These are the guys who long for God. These sons of Korah, they're the ones who like get in a fight with themselves. Like, why are you downcast, oh my soul? Like they're yelling at their own soul. Put your trust in God. As you go through the Psalms, there's like the famous Psalm, Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 44, "Put your trust in God." But of all the Psalms that they wrote, the Psalms that they're most famous for, there's one that kind of stands at the pinnacle, the one that they are most known for, and it's Psalm 84. If you read the little header under Psalm 84, has this ancient header, not part of the text, but it describes it, and it's described as according to the Gatekeeper scholars in Hebrew, Gatekeeper, it references wine press is what gath literally means in Hebrew, and a getith is like wine presses. So the question is like, what does this mean according to the getith? And scholars think that it has a metaphorical sense. That according to the getith means it's a vintage song. Like it's a song that you know by heart. It's a song that's been aging and getting better with time. Psalm 84. You've heard it before. It goes like this: "How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Even the sparrow has found a home." They're like that little bird. I'm so jealous of him because he's so close to you. It says, "Even the sparrow has found a home, a nest for herself where she may have her young, a place near your altar." Like these guys are jealous of birds because they get to be closer to God than they are. "Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked." I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than be anywhere else in the world. Those are the sons of Korah. And so I remember reading these Psalms in my early 20s and my heart just like burning, like I felt like ready to bust, like that longing, that intensity, that need for God. Like I wanted that. And up to that point in my life, like church had been many things, but those weren't the words I would use for it. It felt more like probably church at home feels like at this point, like something you should do, but it's just losing its edge. But that burning passion that these sons of Korah have, that uncontrollable longing for God, whatever these sons of Korah were drinking, I wanted to drink it. I wanted to experience it. And I remember specifically coming to a time wherein I got to study this and just being like, God, where does this come from? Like, what makes that kind of Jesus-obsessed, God-longing person? Like, what makes a worshiper like the sons of Korah? And one day I was studying that, and I went to the book of Numbers. Not usually the place you go for a passionate experience with God, but I stumbled upon this story, and it rattled me. It was Numbers chapter 16 about the sons of Korah. Numbers chapter 16, and I hope it rattles you a little bit, at least today, too. So let's lay some groundwork before we go to Numbers chapter 16. That's where we're going to spend most of our time today. It starts like this. A long time ago, before we get to Numbers 16, you need to understand that a long, long time ago, there's this guy named Jacob, and then Jacob wrestled with God, and his name got changed from Jacob to Israel, which is literally God wrestler. And then this God wrestler named Israel has 12 sons, and each one of his sons have sons. And so each one of these sons becomes what we know as the 12 tribes of Israel. So each son, all their children become a tribe. So this is ancient Near Eastern tribal language here. And there's this whole clan, right? So if you're an ancient Israelite, that means you're from one of the 12 tribes. But when it came to your family name, you didn't go by your tribal name. That was the tribe was the overarching, like almost like states within a nation idea that we would have today. But your family name, that came from something different. It didn't come from your tribe, and it didn't come from Jacob. It dated back to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is that time when God shows up at the mountain, book of Exodus, invites all these people, saves the people out of Egypt, invites them out to Mount Sinai in the wilderness, and he gives them his law. And that point, God showing up, giving them his law, entering into a covenant with them was so significant that whoever was the patriarch of the family at that time, and your family, whoever was the head of the household at that time, your family took on their name for generations to come. So if there was a guy named Andrew at Mount Sinai, his sons and sons and sons and sons would all become Andrew's sons. Andersons, that's what I am, right? So, but back then there were guys like named Korah, Mari, Aminadab, things like that. And that's where their family name came from. Make sense? Okay. So, that's no big deal for most people. But if you're a son of Korah, this is kind of a big deal. So, watch this. We're in Numbers chapter 16, starting in verse 1. It reads like this. Korah, son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and certain Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, sons of Elab, and On, the son of Peleth, became insolent and rose up against Moses. So the story is going to focus on a guy named Korah and then a couple of other guys, unsavory characters named Dathan and Abiram. I just want to focus on Korah for our purposes today. He's the leader of this insurrection here. And Korah, we pick up from the text, he's the great-grandson of Levi, who is one of the... So Jacob had a son named Levi, and Korah is a descendant of Levi, just like Moses and Aaron. That means he's literally cousins with Moses and Aaron. So, here's the question. What happens when God uses your cousin to part the Red Sea and ask you to literally carry his luggage? What happens when God talks to your cousin, Moses, as a man talks face-to-face with another man, while you wait outside and listen to what he has to say? What happens when God invites your cousin, Aaron, to come into the very holy of holies, into his presence, and asks you, literally puts you on logistics, on setup and teardown duty? I don't know about you, but what happens for Korah is he says, this really is not a fair system. Like, why does Moses and why does Aaron, why did they get to do all this stuff and we don't? I think they're lying to us. I think you, Aaron and Moses, are trying to control us. He starts what we would call today an equal access to God movement. That all people should have equal access to God. All people should have the right to seek God in their own way. We see this in verse 2. It really blows up. They, this would be Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, all these people, they rose up against Moses. With them were 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders, who had been appointed members of the council. So it starts with Korah and a few others. But as soon as they get this started, they start getting backed by all these community leaders. This is an all-out coup. This is the moment where he says, I'm the captain now, right? They're seriously ready to overthrow Moses. And then we read in verse 3, they came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far. The community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourself up above the Lord's assembly? So they say, Moses, you're a liar. Moses, you're just grabbing for power right now. So Korah believes something that is still popular to this very day. He believes that you and I have a right, an individual personal right to be accepted by God, that I can come to God my own way. I'm a good person. God loves me. I don't need to go to church. I don't need to follow Jesus, that all people should be able to go to God in their own personal way, that you can find God in whatever way works for you. Now, like all really, really good lies, this one comes very, very close to the truth. At Mount Sinai, God did promise to his people, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So in this sense, Korah and the whole assembly, all the people out there, are holy in that sense. And the truth is, God does love all of them. He loves people. And God does want us to individually reflect his glory and come to him. And it's going to look different for each of us to some extent. And Korah makes a really good point here when he says, if you control how people come to God, you have immense power. He's saying it can become a terrible abuse of power. If you say, this is how you come to God, I know how to come to God, and you tell people to do that in that way, it could be a terrible abuse of power. We've seen this historically. But here's where you got to discern shades of truth here. At the end of the day, no matter how many good points Korah may be making, if, in fact, Moses was ordained by God as a mediator between God and the Israelites, if he is, in fact, the one who is supposed to bring God's people to God, then Korah is not just rejecting religion, and he's not just rejecting Moses. He's rejecting God. That's the question. So I want you to appreciate this maybe not just in an ancient context, but in our context today. Since the Bronze Age, people have been complaining that organized religion is about power, that it's just a way of controlling people. So Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, Dawkins, Harris, your college philosophy professor, they did not come up with this. Since the Bronze Age, people have been complaining that any religious authority is suspect and always lead to God. This is not a new challenge. This is not new. But this answer that we read in this text, this feels pretty new even today. So let me set up the situation of how God's going to respond to this, or how Moses and God respond to this. Moses tries to diffuse the situation. Like Korah and all these guys come up and say, we think we can have direct access to God. We can come to God however we want, however we feel led. Moses is like, you don't want to do this. This isn't going to work out well, but they keep persisting. And they're trying to throw this coup. So Moses finally says, okay, let's do this. You want to see what happens when someone disregards the fact that they need a mediator to come to God. You want to see what happens when someone comes to God on their own merit, on their own strength, and rejects the fact that they need someone to bring them into his presence. He says, let's do this and see what happens. So if you fast forward to verse 28, we see it comes to a head after this lengthy discussion. It says, then Moses said, this is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do these things and that it was not my idea. Like, this is how you're going to know that I'm God's ordained mediator and that I'm not just making this stuff up. He says, let's put this to the test. You think all religion is a power play, and I think that this is ordained by God. You think that anyone can come to God however they want, and I think we all need a mediator to represent us, to bring us to God. And here's the test, verse 29. If these men die a natural death and experience only what usually happens to men, then the Lord has not sent me. I'm a liar. You win. Verse 30. But if the Lord brings about something totally new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the grave, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt. Get this. If a sinkhole opens up and swallows them whole, them and their whole household, then you know I'm telling the truth and you lose. Like, the stakes are relatively high here. Now, this is special. There are many wicked people in the history of the world. I mean, you go down through history, you think of like Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot and like terrible, terrible human beings. But this is a special kind of wicked. When God opens up a sinkhole just to kill you, to make a demonstration of you and your household, that's something special when you're killed by God. So watch this, verse 31. As soon as he finished saying all this, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with their households and all Korah's men and all their possessions. So what does it mean to be a son of Korah? If your family name is Korah for generations to come, in today's world, it'd be like having a last name Dahmer or Hitler or Bin Laden. In Christian terms, it'd be like Iscariot. Yeah, like I'm related to Judas. There is a shadow over all the sons of Korah that they would have to live under for generations to come. We're the family that is so famously wicked, God himself killed our father to make an example of him. Some of you can relate to this. I know a lot of us can. So you know, my grandfather was a famous, relatively famous, locally famous bodybuilder. I know, it shows. And a thief. So he actually spent years in prison. My grandmother left him and married an honest, hardworking man who bought a bar, got into gambling, and became so abusive that my mother doesn't remember entire eras of her life. Some of you know what it's like to live under a shadow of family sin, of abuse, of unbelief, of addiction, anger, selfishness. Some of you know what it's like to live like in a family whose family name is a name of shame, that you're not famous in the area, you're infamous. But that is not the end of my story. My mom left her house, met Jesus Christ, and it stopped with her. It stopped with her. My family, where I grew up, there was no abuse, there was not addiction, there was not shame, and both of her sons grew up to love and serve the Lord. And so it doesn't have to be the end of the story. That's not the end of my story, and that's not the end of the story for the sons of Korah either. If you flip over a few books and follow along these sons of Korah through the generations, you find their name pop up again in 1 Chronicles Chapter 9. Now, if you carefully read through the first 9 chapters of Chronicles, you will hate life because it is arguably the most boring section of all of Scripture. It is the ancient Near Eastern equivalent of a phone book. And if you're under the age of 35 and don't know what a phone book is, look it up. Anyways, it's a long list of names, right? It's a genealogy, these first 9+ chapters of Chronicles. But in chapter 9, verse 17, you find this particular list of names in 1 Chronicles entitled the Gatekeepers. So 1 Chronicles chapter 9, starting in verse 17, says, the gatekeepers, Shalom, Akub, Talaman, Ahiman, and their brothers, Shalom, their chief. So Shalom is the head gatekeeper among all the gatekeepers, right? Tuck that away. Verse 18, being stationed at the king's gate on the east up to the present time, these are the gatekeepers belonging to the camp of the Levites. So great. Here's a list of gatekeepers. Don't you feel warm and fuzzy? So a gatekeeper, let's put this in context. A gatekeeper is a person who kept the gate. Today, the closest thing, like I know a little bit about this in Dallas. I worked at a boutique hotel, and I was the doorman. So I greeted everyone, helped with luggage, helped get people checked in, helped send off their cars, things like that. A gatekeeper's a bit like that, like they work the front door of the temple, but it's more important than that. If you scroll down in that same text, in 1 Chronicles 9, starting in verse 26, it says that they were entrusted with the responsibility for the rooms and the treasuries in the house of God. They would spend the night stationed near the house of God because they had to guard it and had the charge of the key for opening it each morning. So the temple was not just a place of worship, it was a treasury. It was where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, where the sacred things of God were kept, and where many, valuable treasures were kept. So they were also guards of the sacredness of God, guards of this place, guards of the treasures of God. Now, this is really key here. These gatekeepers monitored who came in and who came out of the temple. They were protectors of the most precious things of God. It was an important honor and distinction to be selected as a gatekeeper to guard the sacred presence of God. Now, with this in mind, we go back to that list and we remember Shalom, the chief gatekeeper. It reads on in verse 19, Shalom, the son of Korah, the son of Albioseph, the son of Korah. Shalom, the man selected as the chief gatekeeper to preserve and protect the treasures of God, the holiness of God, the sacred space of God, is the son of Korah. Do you see this? Do you get it? Do you know what this means? So what's Korah famous for? What's his family infamous for? This horrific shame. They were the family. He was the man who was so wicked that God himself killed their father. Why? Because Korah did not respect the holy presence of God, that he presumed that anyone could go however they wanted into the presence of God. I don't need a mediator. I can charge right in. Who thought all religion was bunk and I can go to God any way I want to. So what does God do to his kids? He not only forgives their family, but he entrusts the sons of Korah with the job of protecting his holy presence. He honors the very family that dishonored him. Do you hear this? This is not just grace. This is a complete inversion of the system. This is not just forgiveness. This is taking your enemy and making them your child. This is taking the very ones who are famous for perpetrating this and putting them in charge of it. This is unbelievable. And if you look through the scriptures, you'll find that this is not an exception or a mistake. This is how God works. It's his mode of operation. So he takes a vile man, a murderer named Saul, who's on a mission to kill Christians. And what's he do? He knocks him off his horse and sends him on a mission to go make Christians, as the Apostle Paul. He takes Peter, a guy who publicly denies him 3 times, and he makes him the chief spokesman. He takes prostitutes and makes them into saints. He takes enemies. He takes people who've avoided him. He takes people who've refused to glorify him. He takes you and me, and doesn't just forgive us. He makes us into his children, into his representatives, into his ambassadors. It's not just forgiveness. It's a complete inversion. And that is the core of what it means to be a son of Korah. When these sons of Korah, this family that was given a name of shame and wickedness, when they experience that kind of forgiveness and grace, they start a whole new legacy. No longer are they famous for their father's sin. Now they're famous worshipers. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God. Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than have all the riches in the world. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than have any fame or anything that this world can offer. That's the sons of Korah, that once they've tasted the grace of God, they start a new legacy. And the sons of Korah are no longer famous sinners. They're famous worshipers. I still remember in my 20s when all this clicked with me, and you just see the hand of God through this. That it is only through being lost, utterly lost in the wilderness, that they could find their true home with God. That it's only through confronting their sin and shame that they could experience amazing grace. That it's only through their utter rebellion that they could come to a place of utter surrender. That God takes our smashed lives and puts together like this mosaic that is stunningly beautiful. That He takes sinners and turns them into worship leaders. That He uses our rebellion, our sin, our shame, to turn it around and show the world His amazing grace. So what makes someone into the kind of worshiper, the kind of Jesus-obsessed, God-longing, desperate worshiper like a son of Korah? What makes a son of Korah a son of Korah? And in a word, it's they've experienced grace. In a sentence, sinners make the best worshipers. And I don't mean this in some cheap, you should go out and sin so that you can experience more grace way. That's ridiculous. But I mean it in the Luke chapter 7 way. That Jesus is there at the table at this party with all these religious leaders, and none of them are worshiping Him. None of them are recognizing Him for who He is. And then in comes this woman, this sinful woman. We can only imagine what she's done. We can only imagine where she's been. We can only imagine the shame she carries on her. But what does she do when she sees Jesus, when she breaks into this religious leader's party? She falls at His feet, and she weeps, and she washes His feet with her tears and dries it with her hair. And that woman gets it. That sinners make the best worshipers. So this is the Apostle Paul, who, by any of our standards, would be considered like a superhero, right? But when he self-describes himself, when he's writing to Timothy, what's he say? He says, "Here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst." And he's not just he's not trumping this up. He's not overstating it. He really thinks of himself as the worst sinner because he went after Christians and tried to kill them. So what makes this worst of all sinners the best of all apostles? Grace. He doesn't go out in the world thinking, I'm good enough to do this on my own, or I just need to believe in myself more. He knows that his life is held in God's grace, and he lives in total response to that. That grace transforms him. That sinners make the best worshipers. And if I want to be a son of Korah, I have to confess that I am a son of Korah, right? I have to confess my sin. I have to embrace I'm a sinner. Left to myself, I would self-destruct. If God gave me what I deserve, if He let me control my own life, it would collapse like a house of cards. The earth would open up its mouth and swallow me too. But God, because of His great love for me, for us, came after us, sent Jesus Christ, who made me alive with Christ when I was dead in my sins and transgressions, that while I was yet a sinner, He loved me and came after me. And that grace, when it smashes into my life, that changes everything. That you think Jesus, who died for you and me, Jesus became our mediator. He stood in the gap. And that is not just some theological truth, but now I know that my God not only forgave me, it's a complete inversion. He's taking us, those who've been enemies of Him, those who've put ourselves as God, those who've put other things as God, other gods in our place, and He honors us. He makes us the gatekeeper. He calls us His child, His ambassador. He entrusts us with His Holy Spirit. He puts His Spirit, we don't have to go to some temple, but His Spirit actually resides in us. And when we as sinners, recognize the awesome grace of God in our lives, all we can say is, I'm a son of Korah. And if you are trusting God through Jesus, our mediator, for His grace alone to save you, you're a son of Korah too. And it's terrible news, and it's the best news ever. Church, I miss you, and I hope to see you again soon. I'm praying for you. See you next week.
Well, thanks so much for joining us this week, and trust that maybe the idea of grace and how it transforms us from the inside out rings a little more true to you after today. So I'm going to leave us with this benediction from Ephesians 2:8-9. For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourself. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Stay sane and keep well, and go in peace.